Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Experiential Realism and the continuation of a journey from Physicalism to Idealism Part 1. This is now Part 2 of this philosophical saga, and I must say I'm much more prepared than I was when I made Part 1. And it's not that late, so I'm not getting tired. I'm full of energy right now, and I'll just get right into it. Let me start by saying that the images I've used to illustrate this journey were drawn many years ago as attempts to depict an OBE-initiated lucid dream experience that some might regard as an instance of astral projection. But I now detect, in hindsight, symbolic elements which transcend its bizarre appearances and ostensibly reflect part of my journey shortly preceding and during the making of this podcast. The lucid dream event, and I call it a lucid dream in the sense that I knew my physical body was asleep in bed, as I used the principle of mind awake, body asleep, now appear to me to be symbolically precognitive and speak to much of the observations made by Robert Wagner when I last spoke to him on the World of Lucid Dreaming podcast. Undeniably, some dreams are certainly more symbolic than literal in their representations. Years ago, during my flirtation with the New Age community, I apparently left my body and flew to a faraway land characterized by a forest full of teepees. Eventually, I came upon a red carpet marking a well-lit path to a golden temple. I descended from the blue sky to take a closer look and discovered robots leaving the building. As I flew over them and towards the temple, the robots appeared to be monitoring me with their red round eyes. When I entered the temple, I found a golden hall with many totem-like pillars, some robots, sarcophagi, and two human figures staring at me. One of them was an elegant woman in turquoise attire, graciously smiling at me, which made me feel welcome and at ease. The other was an aggressive little man with a scowl, who was hell-bent on preventing me from approaching the female presence, whom I thought of as a goddess capable of restoring my apparently decaying hands, and this was the only time I can recall my hands peeling like they were in a lucid dream. I didn't like the look of them, and I felt that she would be able to fix me. The short man in blue began to push me several times, and I pushed him back, causing him to protest in Cockney English, which was funny. But then again, in my teens I grew up in East London, so there you go. Subsequently, the woman gave me a warm embrace, and I felt loved and invigorated as I woke up. At the time I wondered if I had gone somewhere, perhaps another dimension or universe, where religious temples include robots that provide assistance. But in hindsight, the experience appears to have been symbolic and somewhat prescient regarding my journey from physicalism to idealism. When I initially flew over the robots, I felt happy, free, and intrigued. My perceived essence or spirit was above those machines, above those mechanisms that behaved like sentient beings, but looked nothing like biological forms and might as well have been semblances of awareness. There was a mystery about them, even if they were soulless machines and they were coming from a mysterious golden temple, the source that could potentially provide answers, a temple in my mind. So as I try to decipher this lucid dream, I may get a bit poetic, I suppose. So even though the robots looked artificial, they were coming from that majestic building and moving along a red carpet surrounded by natural forms, such as the trees that made up the forest and its living inhabitants, some of them in tents. Could those artificial forms have represented materialism, where everything is just matter and mechanisms? And expressed by those mechanical thought forms was a fire in their red eyes that could symbolize a spark of inner life, perhaps, or at least in my confused mind about consciousness itself at the time, their ocular flames could stand for a mysterious fuel that makes them animate and exude an ostensible sense of purpose. In hindsight, those robotic forms appear to have reflected my metaphysical curiosity at the time, as I recognized that the science I was familiar with could only tell me how nature behaves, not what it is in and of itself. I was drawn to the temple for answers, a structure redolent of religiosity and mysticism, but also mysterious. The parade of robots on a red carpet was an image that could represent the importance of AI to me at the time, in trying to understand reality in terms of physicalism or a kind of dualism. But the revelation beyond what I thought about reality at that time, seemed to be in that building. I was over the machines, flying in the opposite direction, which is quite significant. So I was flying in the opposite direction to their movements. So in a way, I was kind of resisting the physicalist paradigm, because deep down I felt that it didn't make much sense. And it's quite prescient, because I made that journey now, and it seems to be complete. And now I would say I'm evolving and building upon, or trying to create a refined picture of reality based on idealist metaphysics, which now I can tell is the most compelling one, far more compelling than physicalism. Physicalism is the worst. So I was flying in the opposite direction to the robots, on a journey towards their source, and potentially my source, in the oniric form of a temple. The gold being redolent of the philosopher's stone. So inside, I realise I've been in much need of healing, as I look at my oddly pink hands, whose pink skin is coming off and revealing purple holes, or a purple flesh exposed to the elements. I felt I needed to be healed with the love of an Asian goddess, and she could restore my pink essence. So the Asian goddess here could represent Eastern wisdom, an Eastern way of looking at things, Eastern beliefs, Eastern metaphysics, which differ from Western, the Western worldview. And I wanted to be embraced by that. I wanted to understand it, I suppose. And yeah, my pink essence, the pink here, the colour pink, could reflect love, as I have always tended to associate the colour with loving and caring. I needed love protection from the goddess, and her garments were mostly turquoise, which to me seems like a hybrid hue between or including both blue and green. And I think these hues are quite significant. A light blue for peace and calm, and green representing nature. I tend to think of nature as being green, green grass, green leaves. To me, green stands mostly for nature, and I embraced nature in the form of a godly woman in that lucid dream, and she gave me love. She loved me, she soothed me, and invigorated me. The short man was wearing a cobalt uniform, as if his boring attire was a one-glove-fits-all, so to speak, that's supposed to console or comfort everyone, which is, what I came to feel about physicalism and materialism. He tried to deny me the spiritual embrace of nature. He tried to convince me that I could do without the loving essence like it was nothing, like love doesn't matter, like love is just an illusion, like I should stay away from it because it would weaken me. It would, because it threatened my ego, and ego thrives on looking good, on looking knowledgeable, on making sense. And if I embraced spiritual things from the standpoint of a physicalist ego, I would stand to look ridiculous from the egoic perspective. So he was denying me all of that, and in hindsight, he was me as an argumentative cynic and materialist, you know. The short man most likely represented my underdeveloped dogmatic self resisting a new paradigm. The temple, with its pillars of creation and holding the secrets of life and death in the form of inscriptions and sarcophagi, could represent my right brain, how it makes all sorts of connections and sees everything. And the short man could represent my left brain, my left-brained attitude and impulses, and he was denying me all of that. He didn't want me to see the entirety of it all. And if these are aspects of myself, then the lucid dream itself certainly reflects a kind of conflict, a conflict of opinion within myself, funnily enough. So the temple represented the self, I think, and the characters were both aspects of it. The image of the goddess reminding me that I am also part of nature and that her love is in me, and the image of the angry titch perhaps representative of an ego striving to preserve what it regards as its nature whilst also refraining from embracing its spirit, lest ridicule befalls it and bruises the little male energy any further. I finally overcame the fear of a paradigm shift and going against popular opinion, but I think many, particularly in the scientific community, still have this problem. The problem isn't science, by the way. The problem is scientism. And this is something that Dr. Alex Gomez Marin has pointed out. He's alluded to the fact that the scientific community can be very close-minded about any observations which challenge the physicalist paradigm and are prone to dismissing any informative breakthroughs that point in the opposite direction as just anecdotal, or they dismiss it as pseudoscientific sometimes. Academics will readily claim that there is no real evidence for the refutation or undermining of physicalism without even looking at the evidence or data presented to them, strongly suggesting otherwise. And they will even refuse to read the data by claiming that it is a waste of time to even check, because the results from those experiments that challenge materialism must be essentially wrong, because consciousness cannot exist beyond the body and NDEs must be hallucinations. Just to give an example of mounting evidence strongly in favour of an afterlife, which the majority of academics will deny, and some will go as far as to say the survival of consciousness beyond physical death is simply impossible. It's heresy and unscientific, in my opinion. It's unscientific what they do when they dismiss evidence. They will simply say that NDE reports are anecdotal, And when presented with a plethora of reports and several cases of out-of-body experience, including accuracy of information about the world which patients couldn't acquire through conventional means, materialist scientists will say those cases are coincidental or just dismiss them on the basis that they didn't happen in the lab. And their resistance doesn't stop there, because when evidence from the lab is presented, then the excuse is that they lack statistics. And when you give them statistics, they will claim that the experiments are lacking replication. And when you provide them with more studies that begot similar results, they will claim an instance of the file drawer problem, which is a term coined by psychologist Robert Rosenthal for a type of publication bias. And even when you do a meta-analysis, they will insist that there must be a problem somewhere. The truth is that they haven't looked closely at the evidence for a new paradigm. They haven't. It's almost like they fear a new paradigm because they hold on to the old one so much. But evidence, the conclusions that you can derive from new evidence, is at odds with the old paradigm. And they should be honest enough to admit that, or be willing to go there. They should be brave enough to go there. Isn't that what science is about? New discoveries, and you jettison some of your old preconceptions in order to embrace new ones, and that way you make progress. But that's not what they do. So there's a real problem in attitude in the scientific community. They don't want to entertain new metaphysics if there is a chance that it may threaten their careers. That's the truth. Ultimately, that's the truth. But many more scientists today are starting to realize that idealism really resolves all the problems. The main one being the heart problem, which constitutive panpsychism fails to crack, as the physicalist notion still underlies it and notions of proto-consciousness are employed. This is partly why Philip Clayton still describes himself as a dialectical idealist and flirts with panentheism and disagrees with Alfred North Whitehead's process theory, where the process relativity is claimed to be primary in giving rise to all phenomena, which still begs the question of what's moving or what's doing it all. Idealism really saves the day, which I suspect Bertrand Russell, once one of Whitehead's students, had an inkling about, and hence why he was so fickle over the years apropos of metaphysics and reluctant to drop the prevalent physicalism, even declaring war on idealism with George Edward Moore at one point in his other enterprise to also politically undermine Christianity, where he affirmed his atheism and religion was just superstition anyway. Despite the fact that the polymath Leibniz impressed upon him with his ideas in science and metaphysics, including idealism and monadology. So you start to get a picture, a psychological picture, as to what was going on in Bertrand Russell's mind and why he was so fickle, and he kept fluctuating between types of metaphysics. I wonder what all of them would say now in the age of advanced robotics, quantum physics, and the violation of Bell's theorem, and the revival of idealism with modern figures like Donald Hoffman and Bernardo Kastrup at the helm. I wonder what smart people like Bertrand Russell would say today, because for some time I was swayed by physicalists of the same or similar calibre. I was a die-hard physicalist, even to the point of entertaining the thought that the mind doesn't really exist, that it's some kind of illusion produced by certain elements or biological materials and function in reality. I even entertained the notion of functionalism as a source, as a possible source of consciousness. But then I noticed that I was being dogmatic and not even bothering to look closely at other metaphysical alternatives, because some of my intellectual heroes hand-waved them off as woo-woo. So I was really just following the trend, and I had my intellectual heroes, and all of them were physicalists. But my experience and my willingness to be honest with myself eventually led me to look at other arguments and hypotheses with an open mind. I never expected or even dreamed that I would find idealism or even panpsychism to be positions more compelling than materialism or physicalism or eliminativism. The mind can indeed bring up many illusions with its contents and cannot be trusted. We already have regular dreams as examples, false awakenings in particular, as they can give us the illusion of having woken up and got ready for work only to realize later that we were still asleep. The only thing we can be sure about is that we are conscious right now. This is unmistakable. However, the real nature of what's being perceived is always uncertain. It's tricky, and there are many questions to be answered. There are scientific theories positing that absolutely everything in the universe is correlated or entangled since the Big Bang. Of course, we use models to try to understand reality, but we should never mistake them for the thing in itself. All the theories we devised are bound to be wrong or incomplete because we are looking at reality through the limited lens of being human. So it might be useful to heed reports of altered states of consciousness away from the anthropic default mode, which will bring us more insight. Those altered states may get us to think outside the box, as it were. This is why I also pay attention to psychedelic experiences, meditation, lucid dreaming, and near-death experiences in particular, which appear to give us a glimpse of some kind of afterlife allowed by nature, where such states appear to remind us that we are much more than being human, where we are able to recall other lives and even experience the perspectives of others, in the realization that we are all one mind. And that's what it implies. I can't count the number of NDEs where people claim to feel what others feel. People claim to read their thoughts and experience what they experience, with all the pain, all the happiness, all the sadness, and they feel it during those instances where they review their lives, and it gives them an insight as to how they affected the lives of others. So one mind from that perspective begins to make a lot of sense. There are definitely recurring themes with those states which need to be looked at closely, as they could also potentially inform us about the true nature of ultimate reality. There are certain observations that have already been made about the phenomenology of the near-death experience. People perceive themselves to be out of their bodies. Many see a dark tunnel and a bright light at the end, sometimes encountering otherworldly beings, feeling an overwhelming love, reviewing their lives, as I mentioned before, acquiring a profound understanding about reality, which much of it seems to be lost when they return to their brains, because their brains seem to limit them, so they become less than what they realized they were, um, which is very, very interesting, which reinforces Kastrup's view, and also Aldous Huxley's view that the brain is a reducing valve. It's like a knot in the medium of mind. It gives you a finite perspective. It restricts you in a spatio-temporal way, and you lose much of that universal wisdom, I suppose. So, much of it is lost. The profound understanding about reality that they acquire. People also report experiencing time distortions, and then returning to their bodies and subsequently displaying some kind of psychological transformation in life, and they miss the other side, but they are also thankful for their special new lease of life. That's also quite common. So there are many things that we have already learned from the NDE, and we can continue to explore those experiences and set up experiments even, but they might be limited in their scope, I suppose. We are dealing with the first person ontology. We are dealing with subjectivity, and at the moment we can only go by reports and confirmations, but we can't really access what they were really like. You'd have to experience it for yourself. I almost sound like Morpheus, from the Matrix. You have to see it for yourself, Neo. Human beings can have an intimation of what's theoretically veridical, or what's more likely to be true, sometimes. Yeah, not always, but sometimes. And they can do it through reasoning, but never with 100% certainty, or not as much as they can, not with 100% certainty, as much as we know that we are conscious. We can be 100% sure that we are conscious, undeniably. I think this is where, what's the word, where epistemology starts. You have to start with consciousness, because that's the only thing that you can claim to know with 100% certainty, because you are it. So physicality is a concept that humans came up with for how certain contents of consciousness feel to the sentient being. But all we truly have are appearances, feelings and thoughts in the field of awareness, in that perpetual presence of mind. There are many different creatures with vastly different minds in the world, but all of them share one thing in common: the potential to be aware or come to know things in their environment. We may speak of different minds and different life forms, but consciousness is only one thing, one phenomenon, that they all have in common, that we all have in common. It's awareness. At that level, at the level of awareness, we are all the same. What I mean by this is that we can't speak of totally different consciousnesses, because to me, conscious or aware, those words only mean one thing. Even though each creature may be aware or know about completely different manifestations in their niches, in their designated niches in nature. I think our universe, which is mental in nature, is a finite derivative of an infinite pleroma, a totality. Because this derivative is incomplete in information, we as human beings perceive an entropic or chaotic universe where finite life forms must compete for self-preservation and survival. So, as human avatars, we perceive an imperfect copy of the divine realm that contains Plato's perfect forms, to use that philosophical model. I believe that a combination of Kastrup's and Plato's idealisms is as close to the truth as we've ever been, as far as I can tell by my estimation and experiences. Darwinian evolution is only a story playing out in this entropic space-time construct. And this I got from the wisdom of Donald Hoffman, and also from speaking to Richard Oxenberg. So Darwinian evolution is only a story that we came up with based on the finiteness playing out in what we perceive. And life tends to self-preserve, and there's a will behind it, which there you go, Schopenhauer's will, which requires consciousness behind it, which Darwinian evolution fails to explain. It's a wonderful theory, as Hoffman has pointed out, and it can explain many things, but the principle behind it for why life forms feel that instinct to self-preserve is beyond it. It's an absolute mystery. So, it's that Darwinian evolution is is a story which is part of the entropic picture of the universe, and entropy is an appearance in itself, which comes from the reducing valve. We are tuned to a constant process of chipping away at infinity in order to create finiteness, and these forms cannot last. It's an illusion, and therefore there's no they don't last. They're only transient because they lack in information, and they have to lack in information in order to have a definite form, in order to have a finite appearance. And voila, apparently in NDEs, you can still have a sense of self, and then you can experience oneness, but you must acquire some kind of another screen of perception, as it were, which can take in the wider reality, or much more of reality than we're currently aware of. So that wider reality can be glimpsed in an NDE. And that wider reality, the pleroma, let's talk about the pleroma. The pleroma is already complete. It has no need to evolve because it's beyond Darwinism. It has no need to evolve because it has infinite potential for manifestation. It's already complete. It's Plato's perfect reality, of which this reality is only a shadow. That's one way to put it. So I suspect that this is the case. It's something like this anyway. John von Neumann once stated that experience only makes statements such as an observer has made a certain subjective observation, but it never makes one that says that a physical quantity has a certain value. In discussions about the observer effect in quantum theory, the physicist Richard Conn Henry expressed that observations are just observations and not observations of anything. And in an essay that was published in Nature 20 years ago, he stated that the implications are that the only reality is mind and observations. So he was speaking to something which is ontologically primitive, which doesn't fall into the trap of thinking that the illusions that we perceive in this reality are fundamental, which includes space-time and all its forms. So the only reality is mind and observations. The observations that are made are within mind. It's almost like mind is taking shape. It's redolent of Adi Shankara's clay pot analogy, where the only reality is clay and the ceramics that you make out of clay are only illusions because they are transient. The only reality is clay. The only reality is consciousness. So, thus, the universe is entirely mental, which, what Henry expressed is tantamount to the claim that Max Planck made about consciousness being fundamental. And, they weren't the only ones. Eugene Wigner once said, and I quote, "It was not possible to formulate the laws of quantum mechanics in a fully consistent way without reference to the consciousness." That's how he put it. But these insights were to be subsequently ignored by most of the scientific community as the shut up and calculate culture took over. The current mythos of science today, prevalent in the mainstream, is that truth is always upheld above everything else. But this is not strictly true. Different forms of corruption infect all human enterprises. That's the truth. All areas of life are prone to error and dishonesty as people care about their reputations, pet theories, their funding, they care about their careers and are prone to cognitive dissonance. It also matters what humans pay attention to in reality due to the layers of meaning that we come across in perception. Because there is an infinitude of things in reality and scenarios that could play out, the anthropic lens weeds out most of it, as it were, and then what we choose to pay attention to furthers that filtering process, it seems, which makes a hierarchy of things to devote our attention to salient. The more we think about something, the more it becomes salient, and then we sort of orbit around that, and that's all we focus on. The more we think about it, it just makes sense. What matters to us in our current form is what we perceive, because we need it to survive. And we may miss out on a whole load of reality. And I wonder if attention is an act of morality relative to us and others, a kind of judgment, because there is always an underlying question, whether we are aware of it or not, about what is deserving of our time and attention. Think about it. What is deserving of our time and attention? It seems to be tied to morality in a way. I know free will and determination are thrown into the mix um, there. But it seems like the majority of scientists miss out on these layers of conscious experiential reality which should be investigated scientifically, ironically. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the problem isn't science. Science is good and useful. The problem is scientists with their left brained biases. Too much of one hemisphere and not the other. We should use both hemispheres equally. Ancient traditions have also encouraged balance in everything. The principles in Hermeticism really encourage that balanced approach because it gets our attention to dichotomous relationships and how opposites are equally important. After all, both heads and tails are required to make a coin, so to speak. It's good to see people like Iain McGilchrist getting our attention to these truths. And I've also heard McGilchrist say that, in his opinion, consciousness is fundamental and that what we take to be physical matter is just one of its many expressions. When he said that, I thought it sounds like idealism. We need more like him in the scientific community. And we also seem to be confused about the oneness of reality, the oneness of consciousness, because we keep going back to physicalist models and we keep seeing time in a linear way when time is only a construct. It just like space. In monistic idealism, there is only mind and everything is derived from it. And then people get confused about notions of hot and cold, light and dark, evil and good. But really, those are two sides of the same coin. It's almost like spectra emerging from consciousness, the ontological primitive. And then we feel bogged down by the problem of boundaries. How is it that we feel separated from the rest of the world? We tend to not look at experience as one unified whole. We just look at how we feel ourselves in relation to the rest of the world, and then we see that there are other conscious creatures out there, or apparently sentient, and other people like us, and we're separated by time and space. And we get really confused about that. So we begin to ask the question, how is it that a oneness, a unified whole, can produce separation? But separation is also a percept. Separation is a concept in the universal mind. Separation, these are also illusions. It's a unified whole, but there's nothing stopping it from perceiving itself from different angles at the same time, because time can be manipulated in this way. Time is also just an idea in the mind at large. Time doesn't have to be thought about as a linear thing. Time could loop around itself. I think we need to expand our minds about the way reality works, because at the moment we're just mostly seeing it through a left-brained hemisphere lens. And when you start to think outside that box, you start to realize that our reality is implied by that unity. The unity defines the separation. There can't be a sense of separation and multiplicity without a sense of oneness and unity. The unity and oneness is the reality which is sustained. If you imagine a loop, it's sustained by the idea of multiplicity and separation. And then one implies the other, and it's a loop, and reality can be any other way. Reality has to be from the beginning already complete, and then like it produces conceptual realities from its pleroma, from its totality. These conceptual realities, such as a universe, for example, are produced from chipping away at the infinity to produce finiteness. Instances of finiteness maybe add up to a whole infinity, which is incomprehensible to the human mind. And so, in essence, it's almost like our perceived reality, this universe, which I take to be just a finite derivative of an infinite pleroma, has been sculpted out, as it were, and it can be sculpted out through conscious agents, and these conscious agents are points of awareness, centers of consciousness, which have been reduced to define a life form, a sentient creature, and the appearance of one to other conscious agents. I recently looked up the founding document of the Enlightenment, what they call the encyclopédie. I don't know if the French is right, but yeah, it's known as encyclopédie in French, and it turns out that Denis Diderot acknowledges that materialism is untenable but useful as a political tool against the church. They knew materialism is the worst metaphysics and the least parsimonious, so while they tried to gain more influence than the Jesuits, they peddled the lie that materialism is true with political confidence, and the plan was that they would do so until they could formulate a better understanding of the nature of reality. Apparently, the bourgeoisie and the scientific elite needed more influence over the masses than the oppressive church. And they were oppressive, it has to be said. The middle class needed to stop the church from persecuting those who disagreed with its tenets. So what better than to say that only dead matter exists and mind, spirit and soul, or psyche, is only an illusory byproduct, right? And the claim that consciousness has no causal power in the world enabled the scientific community to exclude it from the study and to religiously, ironically, ignore it until the 1970s, when Thomas Nagel finally published his "What Is It Like to Be a Bat" paper. The church had had a hold on people for millennia, with the threat of hell in the afterlife if they didn't do as they were told. Now, with materialism, the industrious bourgeoisie could spread the message that they need not worry about hell because there is no afterlife, and that the brain somehow puzzlingly generates consciousness as an epiphenomenon. Materialism brought a kind of relief, liberation from any sort of experience upon death, the cessation of being, and therefore all of your worries, a kind of nirvana, as it were, for everyone. It is ironic that Diderot, who publicly proclaimed his atheism and materialism, was a fan of the works of Paracelsus, a theologian and alchemist who subscribed to Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and invented chemical therapy. He is known today as the father of toxicology. Paracelsus is also venerated as a prophet by Rosicrucians, who study his prognostications, as they called them. He was also a subject of interest to Carl Jung, by the way. Anyway, back to one of the founding fathers of the Enlightenment. Diderot, ironically, began his education at a Jesuit college and eventually abandoned the idea of becoming a clergyman. Later, he would befriend the likes of Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, another important individual in the Enlightenment, who wrote works on politics, sociology, and metaphysics, focusing particularly on subjectivity, which is interesting. Denis Diderot, who cheated on his wife several times, by the way, concerned himself with questions about our origins, morality, art appreciation, and sublimity. He also focused on feelings such as love and strategic intervention in political affairs. He was also plagued by questions of deontology and morality in a godless world, because that was his worldview, or proclaimed worldview. So, you had questions about morality in a godless world, and in an apparently, I should say, godless world, and the nature of love. He couldn't reconcile love with a godless world. He had trouble with that. But he was also concerned with how a philosopher could have political influence, and hence the encyclopedia of the sciences, arts, and crafts, which he co-authored and edited with the others, including the philosopher Jean-Laurent d'Alembert, who was also a mathematician, mechanician, and physicist. So they all worked on the founding document of the Enlightenment. And according to Diderot himself, the aim of the encyclopedia was to change the way people think. So, as you can see, our culture's confidence in mainstream physicalism today is largely unrelated to reason and evidence, and more a product of historic and psychosocial influence, and the circular reasoning that there is no point studying consciousness if it's an illusion of or epiphenomenon with no causal power is much to blame for the fact that we excluded it from investigation for so long. And today we wonder if AI could be or could become conscious, which is a proposition that defies what a number of physicalists have tended to claim, that consciousness only arises in brains, and betrays our ignorance at the fact that a claim about strong emergence is being made without evidence. And those physicalist scientists who posit that AI could be conscious are practically considering the possibility that consciousness can exist beyond brains. It's ironic. I mean, it shouldn't matter how complex or internally intricate a system appears to be, even if it's akin to a bunch of neural schemas. It cannot create consciousness any more than brains do, because brains do not create consciousness if this one is already already precedes the manifestation and form or appearance of a brain. It doesn't matter how advanced the software is. If consciousness is fundamental to the material universe, then it cannot, by virtue of itself, create consciousness. To some of you, this claim may sound bold, brash, and pseudoscientific, but it behooves us to view what science is and what it is not. To paraphrase Donald Hoffman, most have associated science with physicalism, and this one has its limitations. But just because science has been used to delve primarily into the physical aspects of reality, it doesn't necessarily make it an essentially materialist or physicalist enterprise. Quantum mechanics is demonstrating with inexplicable accuracy that science exceeds materialism or physicalism, if you prefer. The wave-particle duality points to something far beyond the limits of matter as a concept. So as long as the conjectures are testable and stand clear of false claims and biases, there is no violation of the scientific method. That being said, there are many mysteries that science has yet to solve, but this isn't a limitation in science itself per se, but a limitation in how we have utilized science thus far. We must also remember that we are seeing everything through an anthropic lens, as I mentioned before, and hence the worldly appearances on our screen of perception. So some things are bound to seem more intelligent and alive than others, and we are prone to assumptions about what life is based on observed chemical reactions, metabolic processes, and even ostensible unpredictability. But with our human senses, we are detecting a partial extrinsic appearance of something more complete and mental in nature, akin to the oniric percepts in the mind of a sleeper. So there is no point in making a fundamental discrimination between materials like wood, metal, and meat substances if ultimately they are only appearances in the field of awareness and only part of the illusion of differentiation emergent from the same energy. In dreams, we may perceive different materials as well as animate and inanimate forms, but eventually we wake up to realize it was all personally mental in a way. We may detect some oniric representations of something from the mind at large, to take Bernardo Kastrup's analytic idealism seriously. And we are always taking in information from something beyond our personal minds, which is what we call the mind at large in that model. But we in dreams, there is only subjectivity, as well as in waking life. Everything that we perceive is private in our minds, in our personal minds, and our personal minds, to borrow from Kastrup's analytic idealism, are alters of the mind at large. They are dissociated or partially dissociated alters of the mind at large. There you go again. The brain is like a reducing valve. It's something. It's an appearance. The brain is an appearance which stands for or symbolizes, if we imagine the image of a brain to be something like a symbol on a desktop, the brain stands for some kind of mental process in nature, right? So we see the image, the appearance, the representation of some kind of mental process in nature which creates apparent dissociations. So from the mind at large, you get egoic minds. And this is the picture that we can derive, not just philosophically, but scientifically. Look around. What do you see? We are one field, human beings and animals and objects can be thought of as arising from this quantum foam, and that's what the field is. We can think of it as a quantum foam. If we take that model, and this field of quantum foam is also a symbol for something that we have detected, and this field is all the same. It's one. There is only quantum foam, and this quantum foam has to be conscious, and voila, it creates all these representations, all these symbols, and we are part of it. We are it. We are the universe awake, as Carl Sagan once put it. So, and at the moment we have acquired a finite perspective, and we look out into the world. But a little meditation can give you another insight, which is, according to I forget his name now. He's the guy who came up with a headless experiment. If you look at the world, you realize that, in a way, even though you are seeing it through the anthropic lens, it is you. Your head. You don't perceive a head right now unless you touch it, and and then you can feel it. But that's also a perception in consciousness. But right now, if you simplify what you perceive right now by just using your vision, you can tell that it's like a world rests on your neck where a head should be, and this bubble of a world extends all the way to the horizon as far as the eye can see. So it's almost like the entire world is your head. It rests on your neck, and when you look down, you see the rest of your body, and that's also part of the bubble. It's just a conglomerate of experiences, and these experiences are unified in the field of awareness. You get, and they're different modalities of the same thing, all into one. They come together as one. You get vision, you get tactility, you get audition, you get everything else, and then you can, the thinking can also take different forms. And if you take psychedelics, you can go beyond all the five senses. You can even perceive colours that you didn't think existed or thought possible to emerge in the field of awareness. Anyway, I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but I think there is much to be explored when it comes to consciousness. And hence why I practice not just meditation but lucid dreaming, which often gives me glimpses of what consciousness can do, which, and these glimpses of what consciousness can do, these abilities of consciousness to mold itself in an infinite number of ways, it definitely goes beyond the default mode of perception. And the default mode of perception is tailor-made to perceive a finite world, which is the world of appearances that we get as human beings. And our perception is tailor-made for the survival of the human species. And it isn't perfect, but nothing is, because we still have to make decisions in our world. And these decisions are predicated on what we experience, and we have to make assessments still. So nothing is perfect. We are still living within the scope of finiteness as human beings. But if we take all of it into account and we forget egos and we forget dissociated alters, if we take everything as a totality, we begin to realize we are so much more than what we think we are or perceive ourselves to be. So, death could be very much akin to waking up from a dream, and if we think of dreams, I mean, all those forms were illusory and informational, just like the waking world that we ostensibly share. And we wake up to realize what things are really like. you know um, it so yeah, we realize what's we truly become aware of what's possible, because currently we still think of certain things as impossible, and we sometimes limit ourselves, and it's so true in science. We create mental manacles for ourselves, and we disregard the potential. So it is also possible, as we have gathered, to experience altered states of consciousness, such as meditative states, lucid dreaming, near-death experiences, where the lines between subject and object are blurred or disappear altogether, sometimes making experiencers wonder where one begins and one ends, calling into question the fluctuating nature and changeability of Markov blankets and its dynamics, and I wish to touch upon this with a lot more detail sometime in the future. In fact, some NDEers have wondered where they begin and end in their expanded localizations, often feeling like somehow they are also the walls, the ceiling, and everything else, which is weird if you think about it. It all depends on what we notice, what we focus on, what we remember, and how we conceptualize what we perceive. And, it's quite common in NDEs actually to realize that people, that you're expanded, you are much more, you are more malleable, you are able to think faster, and you take in far more concepts than you could ever do in the physical body, like you don't have a limiting brain anymore, and you like a baby begin to realize your new potential in that other state. So yeah, and then you begin to realize that you're creating it all. You begin to realize the Godhead, that you are really kind of like, Brahman. You're part of the Godhead, and you are it actually, and you've always been doing it all along. It's almost like realizing that you were there from the beginning of creation, and the beginning of all creations, and there was no real beginning because time and space itself arise from it. So it makes no sense of talking about some kind of beginning that occurred, like some absolute beginning that occurred at some point in the past, because then you're talking about meta time, and if space and time are derivatives of consciousness, then there is no real beginning and no real end. It's truly eternal. Consciousness is truly eternal, not just in the sense of going on forever if we imagine linear time, but it resides outside of time, and because of that, it's where immortality and eternality reside. I mean, that's my way of thinking, and it may be very difficult for us to wrap our brains around that. Even as I speak, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it. That's uh, what the new physics imply, really. What's been coming out of the Large Hadron Collider, and the simplification of equations by assuming that space-time is only a feature. Space and time are features of the field, features of reality, derivative of conscious agents, and conscious agents converge into a oneness, and consciousness in that model, which is where Hoffman et al. Derive their theory from, um, using mathematics and everything else. And I'll go more into that next time. But that's what it implies, that consciousness precedes everything. It's the ontological primitive. We really need to um, grapple with the implications of what that really means. You know, um, so that's that really. I would love to touch upon AI more, but I'm running out of time, as I don't fancy making my videos too long, and it's already long enough. So there will be probably a part three. I think, yeah, there will probably be a part three. I also promised to counteract Felipe Bautista's solipsistic and Kantian claims, but I never got round to it, so I will have to do it in the next video, I think. Um, but I also want to explore, uh, the discoveries made by CERN. I want to explore Hoffman's ideas, and I want to talk about amplituhedra, and also the other objects which exist beyond, are posited to exist beyond space and time, beyond the Planck scale, um, not just the amplituhedron. So um, I I also want to mention other geometries that have been uncovered besides Hoffman's amplituhedron. You know, that's probably more interesting to anyone who cares to listen to this podcast than rehashing counter arguments against Felipe's aspersions of me. But I shall still say something next time, in addition to the argumentative saga between me and him. I may also cover free will and my recent interaction with Bernardo Kastrup on Facebook about politics and how they may factor in a metaphysical context. So, yeah, until then, take care, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I didn't make it too long this time. Oh yeah, and I was going to say, if there is anything that you don't like about these videos, if you have any constructive criticism or some feedback, feel free to do so in the comment section. Um, you know, and I'll try to take it on board, because someone complained to me that I was really slow in parts in my first video, and that's probably because it was really late when I made the video. Perhaps I should have done it earlier in the day, and I was feeling really tired. I began to slow down, so I apologize for that. But from now on, I will always try to be more prepared, and I'll make sure I'm full of energy for these videos, because I want to inform the public on what I've found, and I want to see what people think about these theories and worldviews and philosophy in general. So that's that. So feel free to say anything you'd like, as long as you're not, being an arsehole about it. But yeah, there will be a part 3 to this, and until next time, take care and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel.